Go ahead.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, you're streaming.
All right. Good evening. This is it is August 17th, 2020. This is the meeting of the Sweetwater Union High School District Audit and Finance Board Subcommittee meeting. We will open the meeting. Do I have an approval for the agenda? A move to approve the agenda.
So moved. Solis.
Second.
Moved by Solis, second by Katowski. So if there's no opposition to the vote, is there any opposition to the vote to accept the agenda as it is? Then we'll, hearing no objection, we'll move on to the first item, which is the the call to the public communications. I guess we don't do the Pledge of Allegiance. So do we have any public comments, Ms. Zimmerman?
No, we do not. We do not have any public comments.
All right. Hearing no public comments, we'll move on to item number 1, DC1, which is the Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team FCMAT AB 139 report. And Dr. Sockeld, would you like to take the floor?
Okay. Trustee Hall, I will defer right now to Dr. Geary. He'll open up on this item and I can help provide some.
Oh, you know what? I forgot to ask who was here on the call. So let's take a roll call first. So starting with Board Member Solis. We'll go around and each one introduce themselves.
Oh,
so we have Mr. Gakowski.
Daniel Gutowski, community member and administrative services supervisor, San Diego Community College District.
Mr. Torres.
Hi, this is Jerome Torres, community member, and I love that background that Arturo has behind him. That looks kind of sweet. So
thank you. I can send it to you guys.
All right. So that's great. Dr. Sockeld.
Yes, we have Dr. Sal, Chief Financial Officer.
All right. Ms. Zimmerman. Carolina, I can't hear you. Would you introduce yourself? You're muted. Perhaps your microphone isn't working. So Ms. Zimmerman works for Dr. Sockeld in the finance division of our district. Let's see who else is on the call. For some reason now I've lost the participants.
We also have the Fiscal Services Management team on the call, so if they can introduce themselves.
Right. If you want to introduce them, or they can introduce themselves in order, that's great.
We can start off with Nancy.
Yeah, Nancy Piccone, Director of Fiscal Services.
Hi, Nancy.
This is Vanessa Garcia, Payroll Manager.
Hello, Vanessa.
Okay.
Athena Quarles, Debt Finance Manager.
Hello, Athena. Do you have the payroll manager as well? No.
That was Vanessa Garcia.
Oh, that was Vanessa. Sorry about that, Vanessa. Okay, so next we have Gerardo Moreno.
Good afternoon, Gerardo Moreno, Internal Auditor.
And Daphne and Enriquez.
Yes, good evening, Daphne Enriquez, Internal Auditor here as well.
All right. Is there anyone else from finance on the call?
Not from finance, but we do have also the external audit team from Crow.
Right, but first we'll get the staff introduced, and then we'll go to the audit subcommittee. So we have Dr. Aguirre on the call, correct?
Yes, I was muted. I am here.
All right. Dr. Aguirre and our general counsel, Jennifer Carbucha, are you on the call as well?
I am, yes.
All right. And then we have our external auditors from Crow. Would you like to introduce yourself, starting with Kevin Smith? Is he on the call?
He is on the call. It looks like he's having technical difficulties.
He is on the call.
There he is.
He is on the call, but apparently can't find the mute button. And you guys may try to mute me later. Kevin Smith, engagement partner for Crow.
Thank you, Kevin. It's nice to see you.
You
and
too.
Elizabeth Sav, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Elizabeth Sav. I'm the senior manager with Crow.
And our last guest from Crow is Tim Canup. Would you like to introduce yourself, Tim, and show?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim Canup. I'm a manager from Crow.
Thank you. Working on the audit, right?
Correct.
So, thank you. All right, so with that, we'll begin our meeting. Now, Dr. Aguirre, I understand you're taking the first step on the item number B1. Go ahead.
Yes, I'll be introducing the item. Dr. Sacco, would you mind pulling it up on the screen? Or Nancy, or if somebody has it available? Caroline. Well, this is regarding the AB 139 response, and I'll wait till it comes up. So as you can see, it was sent out earlier to the Audit Finance Subcommittee, and there's been a lot of interest in this area, and one of the things we wanted to do is make sure that we shared with the Audit Finance Subcommittee and with members of the public kind of what we have been doing regarding this report. We have submitted the response to the San Diego County Office of Education as called for, but additionally, there's a number of areas that we have been diligently working on as a district. Much of it centers around our finance department and the work that they have been doing really since the arrival of Dr. Sacco. And so what we wanted to go through today is kind of walk through what are some of the recommendations and the implementation steps and current status. So it's in essence a status update, but we wanted to make sure that it was available for review, to receive questions so we can clarify any outstanding items that might be out there, as well as presenting the work that has been going on and continues to be ongoing, as well as presenting some estimated timelines for when work will be completed or if it will be an ongoing item. Some of these items are ongoing and processes for our district. So with that, I'll ask Dr. Sacco to go through some of the recommendations that are outlined in this matrix, in this table, and provide information about the work that has been completed and or is under process or is being planned. So with that, Dr. Sacco.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre. So Caroline, if you could go to the next slide, where it's the start of that table. And so it's categorized as such, where you see a reference of R1. So those are the recommendations, and then there's a few findings on the last page. And so I'll touch upon these. I know we last presented to the committee. We shared the response, as Dr. Geary mentioned, to the county office. We also provided a copy of the FCMAT report, so that's that point of reference. And so a few of those initial items in the report were centered around an awareness of fraud, a training related to fraud, and also a hotline that, having that set up to provide stakeholders an opportunity if they've had concerns to report that. So what we've noted here on these first few items are emphasizing that in around September 2018, we did establish a fraud hotline. We have been bringing forward to this committee those quarterly reports via the internal audit group. But one item that we are in the process of, actually it's going to be scheduled later this month, is fraud training. We're working with our general counsel and with an outside counsel to provide training to the board, the senior management, and the fiscal services team, finance team, trainings related to fraud and prevention and so forth. So those are areas of our corrective action plan that we are moving forward to address some of those items in that report. So that's these first few items. The next few items, Caroline, if you scroll down, a lot of them, the commonality ties back to the financial reports, kind of starting here about financial information, this R4, providing details on the district's financial position, and the next few ones that you'll look at about reconciliations and so forth. A lot of them have a common theme to the infrastructure that the district is using, the computer infrastructure. There have been, there are, as I state, areas of opportunity to enhance that, but most importantly is us shifting away as an organization from a very gated structure or process and to try and integrate as much as possible with our existing HR module to enhance position control and other functionalities and develop financial systems and reports that are much more robust. And so we've already started that transition last month to implementing that new system. We highlight that here, that we'll have various reports available. We're working through, bank reconciliations. We've been doing that since both Nancy and I came on board, and the management team working with the staff to ensure, because those were audit findings, and again, working with the CRO team, they're aware of the work that we've been doing since we came on board to address that gap with our balance sheets activity to make sure not only cash is reconciled, but accounts receivable, accounts payable, all of those balance sheet accounts. So those are things that we've been putting in place since late 2018 because we recognize that. We also had that further emphasized with the FICMAT Fiscal Health Analysis Report, and certainly again highlighted in the AB 139. So those are things that we were taking action on, but continue that work ahead, and is very much tethered to the external audit work. So that's what's noted here on these slides. And again, or the next few sections. Two, it also focuses on the County Office of Education, this new computer system that we're implementing. They will have, we're working with our IT department. A lot of the specifications have already been drafted to where the county office will receive updated files daily, I believe, and where they can then take that information and have access to our system. That wasn't the case, or is not the case currently even with TrueCourse. We give them files after the fact, after a closing of a period. We've had to develop those types of queries that weren't existent before. This too will help our audit team because we can give them access to the system to look and query information as well. So it'll give stakeholders that ability to do that. And again, we've engaged into that process. A lot of these reports, and noted here too, like the LCFF calculator, cash flows, things like that, we do review that with the County Office of Ed. We have processes in place with them that during our reporting periods, we share the information with them. So again, second set of eyes, because ultimately when they're reviewing our reports, then having that comfort level on the data. So that's kind of this particular page. I think, Caroline, if you scroll down a little bit, and you'll see on status, a lot of them say implemented, but ongoing, because we're continuing to refine those processes, continue to get feedback on that. Again, on this here, the section here talks about the interfund borrowing, the processes we've been putting in place, also working with the county office as they monitor the cash flows with us, looking at, as of April, we had repaid the monies due from 2017-18 to the Fund 49, which is known as the Melrose Fund, and that respective compliance aspect of it with the education code about repayment. We certainly have some, things looking ahead that we're looking at some deferrals, and we'll touch upon that when we go over the 45-day budget update. But again, it's keeping those systems in place of looking at our interfund borrowing needs. And then I think if you go to the next one, Carolina. Again, the review of expenditure items, we do provide to the board on the monthly basis a snapshot of our financials. So in between reporting periods of the interims, we do provide to the board a view of the budget. It's a summary sheet. We also now include in that package for board member request a view of our payroll. So on an average monthly basis, it could be about $23 to $24 million. It's broken down by type of earnings code. So we provide that graph and that detail in the board package. It also shows any long-term debt, short-term debt as well, any interfund borrowings, and where our cash flow needs are at. So again, that's part of our update to the board. We believe that once we transition to N4, there'll be much greater opportunity too for us to have some enhanced reporting available. So that's an area that will continue to evolve. So we're working on that piece. And also on our budget transfers, I'm working on a report to provide detail. Right now it's a summary. We're working on providing further detail for that transparency aspect of it. And then I think, and it notes on here, position control, a lot of the things we put in place to really enhance and create those checks and balances where there was a gap is really enhancing, ensuring that the budget, the positions that are in the budget that are being paid via payroll are budgeted. So we've established a position control team that reviews those whenever there are new position requests or if there's a retirement. And again, continuing to look at where there's opportunity to right size in certain departments. So we've established that. And I think if you continue to go down, Carolina. Again, looking at our salaries, again, a lot of these areas we're looking at salaries, posting of salaries. We do have our payroll files. Once our payroll manager, Vanessa Garcia, receives that from the county office, she works closely with Nancy Piccone, our Director of Fiscal Services, to work with our team to have that posted timely. That was an area that in the report noted the timing of when those entries were posted. So typically it's within 5 to 7 business days that we have those files posted. So we have visibility, schools have visibility to that data. Again, kind of looking at on here is where you notice the status. Again, going back to the N4 implementation, it's going to take us at least 2 years to get it fully implemented. Not to say that we will not have certain functionalities, certain modules up and going as we go. But we're working closely with our IT team because this implementation has finance and HR together, where we're enhancing those features. And I think just scrolling down, and a lot of the financial reports, the detail we're providing. And then, let's see, same thing here. The expenditures tracking adjustments, we ensure we've been working very closely with our team, that any of our journal entries and have supporting documentation, that any of our reclasses to our journal vouchers have supporting documentation. So that way we document our work papers, whether it's during a budget development process or during fiscal year end like we are right now. All of our documentation is reviewed. Our Director of Fiscal Services, Nancy Piccone, reviews that information, reviews those cash reconciliations. And again, that we have that separation and that oversight, that where there was a gap and recognized under the FICMAX reports. And I'd already mentioned the SDCOE review of the district financials. There was a piece there too about the AB 1200s and one of our bargaining items. So every time there's a bargained agreement, working closely with our labor relations team and our legal team, we work hand in hand because without that bargained agreement, we need to be able to know what the details are to include into that AB 1200 disclosure statement, which is a government code requirement, and ensure that we have 10 days for the county to review it before we bring it to the board. So again, all of those enhancements that we've been doing in that ongoing communication. And I think the next slide, or the next page, I should say, goes, if you can move to the next page, Carolina, goes into continue to get maintaining. This is more of, again, the environment as leaders, ensuring that our staff bring to us any concerns, any, data that certainly we've created an environment where, keeping them very included in the conversations, getting their feedback so we can enhance the systems and improve it as we go forward. So I think that covers the recommendations. And I think then the next page, Caroline, I believe, are the findings. Yes. And so these findings here just address the repayment back to Fund 49 in Melrose, I mentioned earlier, that particular element with the education code. So that is what I mentioned earlier, how we've addressed that repayment back in April and how we're monitoring that very closely, those resources. And then I think the next finding, you could scroll down, Carolina. Is, again, this is where we also looked at our TrueCourse system to make sure that there's also who has access to the posting entries, who has access to, again, this goes back to emphasizing checks and balances. We've been evaluating that at the site level, but as we also move forward to N4, that's something we're going to be also enhancing who has access, who has certain security rights, and that we monitor that very closely on a periodic basis to ensure that as folks come to the district, onboarded, or also then leave the district, that all of that information is updated and is current. So we're addressing that. And then this is here where the finding that related to the AB 1200. So we've been addressing that. That's timely, going to the board in accordance to the government code. And then again, documentation. So where they noted about the budget entries and having the documentation to go with the journal entries and budget entries. So we know that it's implemented. And again, our auditors, I mean, they can attest to when we're providing the documentation, it's the information that we can give to them so that way they can review what those entries are supported by. And the next thing, again, just highlighting the cash piece of it, the cash reconciliations. That is an area that the auditors have been reviewing. They did note that back in their draft back in December. So again, that was back when Nancy and I came on board immediately. Started to address that, to remedy that, and have those cash items reconciled. So we've been working with the team and building capacity and how they reconcile and that process that goes with it. So that's why it's noted as implemented. And I think that covers it. So there's been a lot of work to this point, very much tethered to the audit work that the CROW team will provide an update here shortly. And we will continue to improve upon this going forward. It gives us an opportunity to put those systems in place to have a solid accounting and business infrastructure. And if there's any questions at this point, Trustee Hall?
Right, thank you. Yeah, I have to unmute myself too. So thank you. Is there any question or comment from our members?
I have a couple questions and a comment, if I may.
All right, Mr. Torres, go ahead.
Well, first, I want to thank staff for putting this together because it was very thorough, and for the superintendent supporting its release, because remember, this came up at the last committee meeting if the committee was going to be given such a report, and I hope that it does in future meetings, at least get a progress report of those items. One, the comment that I have is I was assuming this was going to be an oral report because we hadn't received any documents, but we did get this at 2 o'clock, hour before this meeting, but that's okay. At least we got it. So the question that I have is just two simple questions. One has to do with R3, and if you scroll down to it, it talks about, quote unquote, and I'll read the last one. The last staff led by finance and internal audit will discuss incorporating surprise audits and the potential for additional risk assessments with the audit and finance subcommittee, which I think is good. But remember, at our last committee meeting, we brought up the issue about the board requesting approval for another internal auditor, FTE, to try to alleviate the inordinate workload on the existing 2 auditors of the district. So now, if we're going to be putting on their backs the task of surprise audits, I want to reinforce that this is not going to be feasible unless you have additional staff. So I comment on that, and even a question, where is that?
What, may I respond
before.
to you
Please.
for a minute, Mr. Torres? All right.
Please.
It was the committee that made the recommendation to the Board of Trustees, right? And I did bring that forward at our last board meeting. I made that report to the board, and it's still early in the year for any positions or adjustments to positions in FTE to be done, because we're still in school's just starting. We're getting the enrollment numbers firmed up.
Okay.
We're still looking forward to what the P1 numbers will be when we get an appropriation and funding. So we have to manage a lot of things. It's not a given that just because the audit subcommittee, which I totally agree with, I've been saying that myself for a while, that we need to have robust internal auditing, and that team needs to have support. However, they've always conducted a surprise audit here and there. I think that's part of what their operation expectation is, but I think it's recognized in this document. And the fact is, it may be a little bit more formalized now than maybe it had been in the past. So I don't want to negate what you're saying. I'm just saying that it's not going to happen like this fast. It's on the radar, and we will be looking into that once we have our funding established and really on solid ground, and we recognize that we are able to then add additional positions. At this time, I think the board's priority, of course, is at our schools and in our classrooms.
Sure, I understand all that. I get all that. So again, I'm just reiterating the point.
Okay, now I'm going to let Dr. Aguirre respond now before we go on. All right, thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Aguirre.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for the response and the questions. We definitely heard the recommendation that came forward from the audit subcommittee to the broader board as a legislative body. Given the focus in terms of kind of where we are with our finances, one of the things we're trying, Dr. Salkeld and I are looking at before we move forward on any type of hiring is, are there things that we could potentially be looking at from a workload perspective, so that that's more of an efficiency question. And we believe we've identified at least one area where we could perhaps transition some of the work either to another department or other individuals. So we are having that conversation, again, with the focus on working with efficiencies, so that perhaps we can build in some surprise audits throughout the year in a way that wouldn't necessarily mean the addition of another staff member. If at some point our budget permits, I think that's definitely something we all agree has a great deal of value. But given where we are and at this point in time with looking at enrollment and or declining enrollment, and Mr. Torres, I believe you're pretty familiar with that as well as everybody else on the committee. We're trying to be prudent with the resources we have. More than anything, I think that's the call on us as a district right now, is to find those efficiencies where possible before we move to the next step of bringing additional staff. Having said that, it might come to that at some point, but Dr. Salkeld and I would like to explore some possible alternatives before we go down that route, because we understand this is an important piece, so that this is an important part of our work that we must conduct in terms of how we move forward towards implementation. I think there's still a little bit of exploration that can happen there, and we might be able to come up with something to get us to a point where once we are able to bring on additional staff, we could do that. But there might be a way for us to get there in the interim, i.e. for this school year or this fiscal year.
Thank you, Superintendent Aguirre. I know, I appreciate that. You guys have so much on your plate, and again, I don't want to belabor the point, but the point has been made. I want to go to R10. In that, if we may just scroll down to that. And this is just a procedural question, if I may. It's on the last paragraph where it says, regarding any new salary or benefit expenditure items in the budget, fiscal management reviews the additional financial burden as compared, blah, 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 blah. So the question that I wanted to ask is a procedural question, is that does staff or has staff ever looked at doing a salary and benefit comparative analysis when it's negotiating potential salary increases with its bargaining units? And does it ever access information either provided through EdSource or CDE or Transparent California? I mean, do you guys ever look at comparative data of what the salary and benefits scales are by position among other comparable school districts? And will that be part of your analysis moving forward?
So if I could add there, we do receive from School Services of California. They do provide a comparative analysis for local districts, like type of districts that has the salary information, the benefit information. So that is a tool that we have to have that information. We work closely with our labor team, and I know that Ms. Carbucci is on here as well and can attest to some of that information from the bargaining aspect. But when we do bring forward, I mean, most recently, the items we brought forward under the AB 1200 are salary reductions, either through, like with our teachers union, we had 3-day permanent reduction. We've had furloughs with our CSEA unit as an example. Those are calculations that we have to, through that bargaining process, calculate, and that's what gets included. So if there were conversations about raises or anything down in the future, we would calculate that and would use these other, comparative sources to have that dialogue. But it's a very dynamic conversation at the bargaining table. But we in finance would have that as a basis, and that would eventually lead into an AB 1200.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's it. Other than that, then I think this was really well done, and I look forward to receiving progress reports in the future.
And just to note, I know this was sent to the committee this afternoon, but this item has also been posted to the agenda item, so for others outside of the district or the public and the community.
Thank you, Dr. Sachfeld, and thank you, Mr. Torres, for your questions. Mr. Gutowski, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have just a comment in general, and accolades to the staff and their hard work that they've done so far in meeting this plan and these objectives, and also then looking ahead in front of us. I know that there's a lot of process improvement that we're looking at doing, and I wanted to remind the board and Moises of the process that we used with Prop O. We decided that there was changes that needed to be made and do performance improvements, so we had a 6-month review in the audit. It's placed on the external auditor. Staff has the burden of having 2 deadlines, but with the 2 deadlines, you also get the credibility of meeting the objectives within that time frame. And looking at being 2 terms on the Bond Oversight Committee, maybe a 3rd in my future, I think we made a lot of progress by placing that additional burden upon staff, and I think it was very fruitful. And I would like the board to consider that. And I know we are going to be looking at scope of the audit, but that's something that I would highly recommend.
Are you talking about it in conjunction with the AB 139? Because that is not an external audit that was being done. I mean, not this from FICMAT. We didn't engage FICMAT. They were engaged by the County of San Diego to do this audit. So any follow-up for them would be through that arm of the hierarchy. I think what we are doing now is we're being reported, we are sharing this all. Am I wrong, Dr. Aguirre? This is something that's brought weekly or twice a month to the county and reviewed. I mean, they're doing an ongoing oversight, and those meetings and conversations are being held continually by Dr. Sockeld, by Dr. Aguirre, by Ms. Picone, and the staff that they manage. It really is, I think part of our role is to hear those reports coming back to us. I think this is, because there's still pieces of it that certain things have not been completed, even that were pending, you know, but I think we'll continue to have these come back, like Mr. Torres said, to monitor, and to hear the board's doing a lot of monitoring itself. I mean, we've asked, I know I requested every other month that we get a report on the progress of the implementation. That's one piece. The monthly cash flow and monthly financial report that was reestablished, that was also brought out by myself, you know, as a request to the, and staff was willing to comply with that. And they've been doing a great job of bringing that forward. The ability to monitor the salaries by type of salaries being earned, because we want to watch not just the position salaries are within the scope of what we budgeted, but that hourly and temporary staff is also monitored and doesn't exceed what we're planning. Those are some of the things that we're doing. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for about you know, when you're comparing it to what happened with the Prop O performance audit, because that was a whole different, I'm not sure how that would work in this case.
Yeah, I think,
Aguirre?
if I may, yeah, just from a more global perspective, I think that rebuilding the confidence in our district is going to take time, and that's really what we're looking at. I think in Dr. Salkeld and her leadership, I think we absolutely have the right person to rebuild that confidence more than anything in our community. And I think that moving forward, we are committed to bringing updates as this plan is implemented, as improvements are made, because much like in the world of bond, I think infrastructure is key. And the infrastructure we're talking about here has to do with our system and our platform. And unfortunately, the platform that we have was not robust, and I'm probably being diplomatic. But at this point, given the transition is underway, it's actually exciting to be able to bring forth updates as those different steps and modules are implemented, because then we can start rebuilding, again, that confidence in our community that we're making improvements to the system. And we have a method for continuous improvement, which means you check in, and those check-ins are with the Audit and Finance Subcommittee. They're with our Board of Trustees. That's how the accountability piece happens for us. And those difficult questions that we get, we welcome, so that we can problem solve them, we can anticipate them. Again, the more eyes and the more brains that are on this, I think can only help to improve our systems. And again, I just want to acknowledge all the work that's been happening under the leadership of Dr. Salkeld.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to say that the County Office of Ed has been very, they're really a positive partner in making sure that we move this forward, and that we have a robust system that interacts with their system, and they're working with us very well in getting that done. We're moving it forward. It is in the best interest, and the board is aware of that. So I agree, we'll be watching it, we'll be monitoring it, and we'll be expecting reports.
I think
Because one of the
Daniel's been
things
trying to
that
give a clarifying comment, if we can allow Daniel to speak.
Well, can I finish? I mean, excuse me, I was almost finished.
Oh, okay.
But I would say that one of the things that we are expecting in our report on the in-floor implementation is the timeline, the milestones of, you know, so we can monitor if they're being reached, if we're falling behind, and what is the plan to address those certain things. So yes, if you want to speak again, Mr. Gutowski, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the the robust dialogue regarding my question. I do appreciate that and the continued feedback. I was referring more to the annual audit. In providing it then with the annual audit, it's going to be addressing obviously a lot of these concerns. And so it's that additional credibility piece that's, it's giving credit for the hard work that's being done. And so anyway, thank you. No further comments.
I believe Trustee Hall may have gotten either frozen or dropped from the call. Unless I'm the one who's frozen and has been.
No, I think it's Ms. Hall. I think she got it.
The world of technology we're all trying to maneuver here. Let's maybe we give her a little bit of time to see if she needs to reconnect.
Yeah, it looks like she's leaving, and then hopefully.
Yeah, she's trying to reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But everyone was able to hear my comments.
Yes, I those came through. And thank you for those.
And as we wait, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Salkeld and the staff for the hard work that they put into this document. And of course, it's going to keep getting. It's a work in progress, but really appreciate all that hard work, and it's going to show how much we're trying to make things better. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Solis. I'm trying to see if well, maybe we give President Hall or Chair Hall a couple minutes. In the meantime, Carolina, would you mind bringing up the agenda? Unless anybody has any further items on that particular agenda item, I think there's been good conversation. All right, so that would be item C1, correct? That we just addressed?
Correct, right. Next, from the auditors. Oh, it looks like Trustee Hall's back.
Okay.
Trustee Hall, can you hear us?
All right, so are we complete? Did you finish your remarks on the item C1, the FICMAT audit, Mr. Gutowski? Yes?
Yes, they did.
All right, so now we're going to move to item C2, the audit status update. Dr. Salkeld, would you like to lead this off?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hall. So I'd like to introduce our Crow partner, Mr. Kevin Smith and his team. He'll be providing an update similar to where we were at our last meeting, the work that we've been doing regarding the 2018-19 audit, the district financial audit, as well as the Prop O, and what our plan is ahead here in the upcoming weeks to bring that forward to the committee and then also to the board so that we can conclude that audit. And then he'll also be providing an update where we're at with the 2019-20 work, because we've been doing that over the last few weeks, starting that engagement. And he'll be providing an update on the specific, we've attached to that item the engagement letters for those respective audits. And he'll be providing some background there regarding the scope and the related costs for those, particularly the district audit, the district financial audit. So I'd like to hand over for that update to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Salkeld. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening, this afternoon. Wanted just to briefly bring you up to speed with where we are within the status of our audit engagement. The presentation you just received on the district's response to the AB report is one of the critical things we've been waiting on as well. As we have discussed with you in the past, management's response to that report was absolutely critical to us to understand both risks that they see as well as any risk that it could cause to the financial statements that will be issued, as well as to understand their plans in place on a go-forward basis. So receiving that update tonight, absolutely critical. With that said, we had been anticipating we would be getting that at this point in time, and we've been working closely with management to establish a timeline to finish our engagement. We believe that we will be coming back to you as an audit committee on September 21st to present the financial statements as well as the Propo audit, the single audit, and what we call our management letter, or significant deficiencies and material weaknesses. So happy to discuss kind of the overall status today. But again, a reminder that we are still in the process of auditing the financial statements and concluding our procedures. Examples of that post receiving the FICMAT report, we have also expanded our audit engagement team to include some forensic specialists that will be doing additional procedures related to kind of the big data overall environment, looking at addresses of payees, just a variety of things that you might think of as kind of a surprise engagement, but really to address some of the procedures or some of the weaknesses that the FICMAT report addressed. You know, as I get into my prepared remarks, I'd also really echo the things that management has told you about TrueCourse as well. Typically, when we think
is now joining.
Typically, when we think of an IT system, we test a variety of internal controls embedded within the system. Some of them are known as ITGC, or Information Technology General Controls. Some are application controls. And really, it's designed, quite honestly, to try to limit some of the substantive procedures that you have to do in order to opine. So you gain what's known as control reliance. In many cases, IT systems aren't strong enough to actually reduce that substantive test work. But in some very limited cases, the actual application increases your risk. This is an area where I would say fits directly into TrueCourse, and our assessment of the IT system is not only are we not utilizing it to reduce procedures, it has actually increased the procedures that we're required to do. An example of that, and again, we're kind of walking this fine line of auditing a year when management was coming in and really trying to clean things up. So the procedures were not in place year round. They came in and really started addressing. But at the time that Dr. Sockeld and her team came in, you could actually post a one-sided entry to the general ledger, which in my 30 years of experience, I've only seen one other entity that had that. So it's just a fundamental. You don't even think of it as a control. It just can't happen. And yet it could within this. So really we've expanded our test work. We've reduced our materiality, both for the internal controls that are inadequate within the IT system, as well as the items that were noted in the FICMAT report, as well as the SEC investigation. So we are in the process of addressing all of those and trying to wrap up our procedures as quickly as possible. At this point, we do have numerous adjustments to the financial statements. Some of those will relate to previous periods. Some will relate to the current period under audit. I think one of the key points that I would like to make is that although our procedures have identified many of the adjustments, what management has been doing over the course of the last 18 months has also identified many of these adjustments. So the processes and controls that they're putting in place are absolutely critical and have identified many of these adjustments. Where it becomes very difficult from an auditor or for management is to understand which period some of these adjustments. So Dr. Sockeld mentioned cash reconciliation, accounts receivable, and accounts payable, the blocking and tackling of those reconciliations. As they've identified errors, they have had to determine, and we have to concur, does it relate to fiscal year 17 or before, i.e. opening balances for the financial statements that we're auditing? Is it something that can be addressed in the upcoming year? So really, where is that proper place to put those entries? And that's where a significant amount of time has occurred. The adjustments are really going to be in two different sets. As a governmental entity, you really have two sets of financial statements. You have what's known as the government-wide, which, for lack of better words, in the corporate world, think of it as a consolidation, but it's also really where you have full GAAP or full accrual GAAP financial statements. So this would incorporate both your capital assets or building and plant, as well as your long-term debt. We did note errors both in the capital assets as well as the debt. The debt tended to be very capital lease specific, as well as kind of some nuanced accounting transactions. From a government or from a capital asset perspective, really the key root cause or the adjustment that you will see in the financial statements was an inability by previous management to recognize when a fixed asset was completed and placed into a depreciable life. So you had just a built-up of what's considered construction in progress for assets that were actually in place and should have been being depreciated. So that would be the largest of the adjustments that we have noted at this point. Management continues to refine what they believe that estimate to be, or what they believe that adjustment to be, and we are subjecting that to our test work now. Within the general fund, numerous entries. I'm pleased to say they go both ways, which is an indicator from an audit perspective that it's not a bias in trying to manipulate financial statement presentation. It appears to be true errors because in some cases they're improving fund balance and in some cases it's decreasing fund balance. Really, the entries surround the cleanup of the receivables and payables that kind of cut off as of year end. But probably even more importantly was the number of entries that management had identified in fixing those cash reconciliations. Numerous adjustments had been carried forward for numerous months by previous management, reconciling items that just didn't make sense, etc. That has been caught up, but it will have a significant impact upon the financial statements as previously presented. The only other fund that we'll have at this point that we've identified an adjustment is within the Melrose Fund, an additional receivable from the general fund because the amounts had not been calculated for the proper interest accruals in monitoring and measuring just how much the general fund owed back to the Melrose Fund. We do have what I would consider to be fairly significant remaining steps within our financial statements. We have received and reconciled a complete journal entry listing from the management. This is an area which is conducted in every engagement. What made this so unique, again, is kind of a limitation and a weakness within TrueCourse. There were numerous entries that didn't appear to relate to or didn't seem to have an impact upon the current year and the initial population provided to us. It's a weakness within TrueCourse that you can actually book an entry, post an entry during a fiscal year, but apply it to a previous fiscal year or to a future fiscal year. So significant amount of time by both management as well as the audit team really reconciling that and understanding, one, that nothing untoward had happened in the current fiscal year related to previous years, and that everything worked. Again, we'll be testing those journal entries now that we have the completeness and accuracy of those. Upon at the conclusion of this presentation, I believe Dr. Stockhill is going to be talking about the 45-day budget. That's another kind of key pending item that we're receiving as well to understand and how it flows into our going concern analysis. Within generally accepted accounting principles, there is a presumption that an entity will continue to exist for at least 1 year upon your issuance date. There are a variety of things that have to go into that projection. If you are debt reliance, is there a written agreement in place for that debt? It's not something that you can just say, well, they've renewed it every time. So we'll be looking at management's projections and to understand whether or not we believe that the reader should be an emphasis of matter within our opinion that draws the reader's attention to the fact of the financial difficulties that the district is experiencing. I will make one caveat. It is likely that we will have consistent reporting similar to what the predecessor auditor did. What I how I would phrase this, though, is management made significant strides in the current year in addressing those issues. And then, like everyone else, was blindsided by COVID-19 to a great extent. So although they almost find themselves right where they were from a fiscal distress standpoint in relation to the previous years, a lot of that is systemic and is also systemic to every one of their peer organizations across the state of California as well. So it's really unfortunate that you can't, that the disclosures don't go away and management doesn't get benefit for the steps that they had taken. But it would also be a much harsher reality if those steps had not been taken going into this pandemic time. We are, as of tonight, be reviewing management's responses to the FICMAT report and understanding those areas where they say have been addressed, verifying those in either through cross-linking to work that we have already done, or possibly if it's a new control that they are talking about putting in place, understanding the design of that control as well. I mentioned that we were going to be having some forensic analytics, both over payables and payroll will be the two key areas of focus that we're looking at. And we will have final inquiries with your SEC bond counsel to understand if there's been any movement whatsoever from the SEC standpoint. I do anticipate that we will be reporting material weaknesses and significant deficiencies within your internal control structure. Really, it will relate primarily to TrueCourse, as well as kind of a lack of overall financial internal controls related to reconciliations. Those could include capital assets, accounts receivable, and accounts payable. Nothing that management hasn't been telling you about that it was a problem from the moment that they walked in. But continuing to see those types of things. We will also be issuing our two single audits, or our single audit as it relates to the federal grant compliance. At this point in time, I do not anticipate any findings of non-compliance at that point. A lot of information, not all of it good, but I don't think any of it a surprise to management or the audit committee, but I'd be happy to answer any questions as it relates to current status.
Thank you. Mr. Gutowski, would you like to go first?
No questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Torres. Yeah,
I just need
yourself.
I just need to unmute myself. No, I just want to thank Mr. Smith. That was a great presentation. It was, and I very much appreciate the candor in which it was given, because that's the kind of honesty and integrity that I look forward to and expect from staff. And I just want to commend you for being forthright with us and whoever's viewing us online. But anyway, I look forward to your presentation in September. And I would just ask that Deanne's really good in making sure that the committee gets all the materials for our board meetings, our committee meetings. But this is going to be, I would anticipate, very voluminous stuff. And we're going to really need to get into the weeds, as they say. So I would just ask Dr. Salkfeld and Deanne Vicelo to try as best they can to get us those materials in advance, so that way we can have a chance to really go through them with a fine-tooth comb and have the proper questions to ask, so we can have that robust dialogue that's needed. But anyway, great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Solis, do you have any questions?
No questions, just thank you. Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you. Yes, Kevin, Mr. Smith, we really thank you and your team for coming. So the 2018 audit, we understand is still ongoing. We'll be looking forward to greeting you when you come back in September. So thank you.
Thank you.
So Dr. Sawkill, do you want to segue into the next portion of this item?
Yes, so the next section, thank you, Mr. Smith. So we'd like to have you also provide an update is on the 1920 audit and the work related to that engagement, because we have provided the engagement letters and particularly the scope, as you've highlighted, just as it relates to 1819, how that's carrying forward into 1920 and the respective costs for that audit.
It'd be my pleasure. So I think I happen to concur with Dr. Sockeld. It's one of the, for financial statements to be meaningful, they really need to be issued in a timely manner so that those charged with governance, management, as well as the school board can make informed decisions. The idea that it's August and September and we're talking about issuing fiscal year 19 or 1819 is, or yes, 1819 really means that we're trying to draw a line in the sand and saying from a go forward point, these are financial statements that can be relied upon, and really trying to provide that credibility that Mr. Gutowski referred to previously. With that said, one of Crow's primary initiatives, as well as Dr. Sockeld's, is really to get us back on an appropriate timeline. So the June 30th, 2020 financial statements being issued within the California the deadline. And as a general reminder, that's typically December 15th. But there has been a blanket extension provided in this current fiscal year because of the world that we're all living in. The state of California has said March 31st is acceptable. With that said, Dr. Sockeld's guidance to us has been, let's try to come as close to that December 15th as we possibly can. Design your audit procedures accordingly. So we actually are in the process of actually looking at compliance with a variety of state regulations, as well as beginning our planning and interim procedures for the fiscal year 20 engagement. We issue two separate engagement letters. One is for the Prop O audit. It is very consistent with what was received and agreed to with management in the prior year. The second one is the one that Dr. Sockeld wanted me to spend some time with, and it's the audit of the financial statements, what we were talking about today. And the key change here is the fee, and I'll just be as blunt and as candid as I possibly can be. It is amount that it's a multiple or a significant multiple of what Crow had proposed through the RFP process. It is less than what you have paid to date as it relates to the fiscal year 1819 because of the improvements that I believe we have seen be put in place. We do believe that the audit effort will be substantially reduced from what this year has been. But again, with 12 more months of TrueCourse, although there are now manual internal controls surrounding TrueCourse that management has put in place. 12 more months of TrueCourse, as well as continuing scrutiny by the SEC. It's just a different risk model than what we had proposed upon through the RFP process. So with that said, we have estimated our fee at $150,000. Obviously, we would only bill you for the time that it actually takes to do the engagement. So as management continues to improve, if that number is less than that, that's what we would bill. But that is our best estimate of what we believe that the FY fiscal year 20 engagement will take for the audited financial statements. Again, it's a reduced level. It's kind of twofold: reduced level of materiality, but all of that is in response to risk, whether that be external, i.e. the SEC continuing to look at the school district, as well as internal. The impact of your IT system, it being the primary cause there. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions as it relates to this engagement letter.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions from the committee members?
No questions.
All right, I'm not hearing anybody ask for it. Based on what we're hearing, do we have a recommendation to the Board of Trustees to accept these engagement letters and support the fees? can I, if you have any objection to that, just.
I make a
Hello?
motion to approve.
All right,
Gutowski.
I have a motion from Mr. Gutowski. Do I have a second from the team?
I'll second. Solis.
Mr. Solis, all right. So if there are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, we'll move that forward as being accepted and recommended by this committee to the Board of Trustees to approve the engagement with Crow for the 2019-20 audits. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Thank you to your team, Ms. Sav and Mr. Canop. Yes. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you very much.
You're welcome to stay on the call if you'd like to stay and listen, but if not, enjoy your evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So the next, we'll have Dr. Sokol, and she will be presenting on item C3, the financial report, the 45-day revision of the 2020-2021 fiscal year budget revision. Dr. Sokol.
Thank you, Trustee Hall. So as Carolina pulls up the presentation, I'm going to highlight a few slides, which this presentation was presented to the board last Monday on the August 10th, because per statutory requirement, we had until August 13th. And if she goes to slide 2, Carolina, if we could start there. And so this is a very unique 45-day. I think what I last presented to the committee is, where we had the budget adopted based on the May revision assumptions. And as I had stated at the time, we're quite draconian in nature in terms of the impact to the bottom line to the district and what was proposed with the governor's budget. And so moving forward, typically what a 45-day budget reflects are those significant changes that were included in the final budget act signed by the governor. And so from that point is where the 45-day timeline commences, and that's where we had until August 13th. What was unique is because of the significant nature of what was in the May revision, and then with the final approved with the legislature and the governor, what the budget entailed, what it impacted to not only the statement of activities, or in essence the income statement, but also the impact to the balance sheet in terms of cash deferrals. The county office guidance that was issued in early July indicated that we needed to, in essence, do what I call kind of a hybrid between what we normally would do during a third interim, which is in May, and then also kind of revamping our budget. So we did prepare for the guidance of the county, because what was also another factor was because we did not have our 2% economic uncertainty requirement as a reserve. We had to prepare a new government standardized, for the standard account code structure report known as the SATS report for the general fund only, not the other funds. It was just narrowed down to the general fund. We had to run through that software, do the technical review checks, update our criteria and standards. We had to provide updated cash flows, provide updated assumptions. So that package in its totality, we actually reviewed it with the County Office of Education in advance, reviewed all those details, similar to what we do with other reporting periods. So it was quite a bit of an effort that you normally don't do in a 45-day. Usually it's a one-page document that kind of shows those, what I call the puts and takes, the pluses and minuses of those transactions, but this was significant. So I'm going to highlight a couple of those key changes here throughout some of these slides. Some of the other slides are going to be more informative. So I think we can go to slide number 4, Carolina. And so in essence, this is highlighting the work that, was very drastically different from May because of that work and with the state legislature and with the governor's office, or the governor, and kind of what was compromised at that point in time was a key shift. And so those variables in terms of the assumptions changed significantly. So we can go to the next slide, slide 5. And here's just a table providing that snapshot. And what I've been calling this is, we're starting on a roller coaster right here in the last few months. I mean, our January was certainly a very different environment than what was presented in May. Again, all attributed to primarily the COVID situation. And there's still some uncertainty ahead in terms of how cash receipts come in at the state level from now until January, when the governor does provide his update on the 2021 budget, or the subsequent year. And then, kind of we're a status check-in. But you can see just from the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee is where the funding goes towards schools. You can see that we went from 84 billion to 70 billion from the May revise, and then kind of it held in terms of the enacted budget. And it would held in terms of what you'll see what it did to the revenue side of things, but then also the cash deferrals. One area that state legislature might say may not necessarily be a cut, but really is a cut to the funding to school districts is in the local control funding formula is a cost of living known as a COLA factor in what school districts get funded on. So in the enacted budget, the 2.3% was not factored in. So it was in essence about an $8 to $9 million revenue impact to the district because that was not included in there. So that is a key variable, and you'll see that when we have a snapshot of our LCFF calculator. So I just wanted to call that out. And one of the key assumptions going forward into the out years per the county office guidance is to assume a 0% COLA going forward. And then if we can jump to slide number 9. And so as we get to slide number 9, the other one right before, and how one of the key factors, how the state balanced the $54 billion shortfall in the state's budget is by, in essence, and you'll hear these budget deferrals or cash deferrals. We as school districts can still record what the revenue or what the apportionment will be. So that's where there was a significant pickup from the May revise to the 45-day. So it is a positive to the revenue piece of it. However, what you're going to see then on the next slide, Caroline, if you can scroll this slide, it's 10, how the state balances and how they record their expenditures and what the outgo is to school districts. In essence, what you see here and how this is tied now to the cash part of it, what we as a district would be entitled to in terms of revenue dollars, on average, it's about $20 million a month. So in February, and all these months that you see thereafter through June, the state is in essence saying, we're not going to pay you that $20 million, or we're going to pay you a portion of it, or we're going to pay, or not pay you at all, 100% of it. We're not going to pay you until November, October, and all the months that you see here below. So it's in essence like you have a paycheck, you're going to be earning $50,000, but I'm not going to give you your paycheck until January. I'm still going to have you, recognize this. So that's key in how we had to build our cash flows, because we still have obligations to meet. We still have to meet payroll. We still have to meet our vendor payment obligations. So that February to June timeframe is going to be very critical in how we manage those cash obligations. And if you can go to the next slide, Carolina. And again, this is all subject to the types of guidance we get. So we do rely on the county office guidance and how we built those assumptions as it relates to cash. There are other agencies such as School Services of California that has other guidance, but from the county standpoint, we took the most conservative because it's a lot of unknown going forward. So in essence, looking at February, the guidance is we would take our $20 million as an example and defer 65% of that to November. And then basically the following months, 20 million each month is going to be pushed out to the next subsequent year. So that's how the state at their level can balance their budget through this mechanism of cash deferrals. This was done about 10 years ago during the Great Recession, during those times as well, and how there was multiple years and where the cash deferrals were in play. And I suspect that this is something that we will experience here for at least the next few years. Again, all subject on how the economic recovery is at the state level. And if there is also an infusion from the federal level. There is, again, a lot of talks are stalled at the federal level for any other stimulus money. The governor has made a commitment in the budget that if there is any state or federal money, that would go first and foremost to alleviating these cash deferral issues. Wouldn't be necessarily new money for schools, it would help these cash obligations. I think, Caroline, if you can go to the next slide, slide 12. So one key thing that we've been having conversations with the county just to know what flexibilities we have and what options we have for managing that cash going forward into the 2021 year. One thing is, the governor has said deferral exemptions for those cash deferrals. However, one thing in terms of the county and other agencies we've been in contact with indicate that the school district must exhaust all internal and external borrowing options. So we have, gone to the county treasurer for the day-to-day working capital, type of borrowing. But now what we're looking at is we're going to have to look at our internal resources again, such as the Fund 49, the Melrose, as a bridge for that timing aspect of it. And so that's where we're at with kind of planning ahead. Again, hopefully that will not be required in terms of as much, just depends on those monthly reports at the cash level at the state. But what the governor provided in his June budget was increasing what you can borrow from your other funds. It was the statutory requirement was 75%. In the budget, it allows now for 2021 and 21-22, in which we can borrow up to 85% of balances in those cash balances. What's sitting in the treasury accounts at that point in time. That we can borrow up to. That what was unique about that, we typically bring that type of resolution to the board in June, but with the governor's budget, it required a public hearing, and so that was brought forward to the board last week to have that, and we will bring that forward again next year for the 21-22 year to provide us that flexibility. And if you can jump to slide 30. Again, a lot of the other slides just provide some context in terms of the governor's budget, but in terms of jumping to what that means to the district. So as you can see here on this slide, there are a lot of variables that we had to evaluate, looking at our revenue through local control funding formula, looking at what, the pension rates, and were impacted by. We had already incorporated a lot of that in terms of the pension rates back in May, so that was already factored into our adopted budget. The federal funding from the CARES Act, that's separate and apart from, we already had a direct stimulus amount of about 8.2 million, but there was also a little over 30 million. Again, these are restricted funding sources. This 30 million has to be spent by this December. There's various conditions that the governor has put in place on how those funds can be spent. And then there was also, on a positive, in one of the governor's investments that actually went back to January, one item that actually stayed in place throughout May revision and so forth, was an increase to the funding rate for special education program under the AB 602 funding. So that was included in this budget revision. Lottery monies, the amount per average daily attendance actually went down slightly, about $153 on the unrestricted side, down to $150. So because we knew that new amount, we had to factor that slight change in there. These next two items here, cash flow analysis and temporary cash borrowing, we had to look at that. Goes back to those deferrals. There's extra costs, right, to borrow internally. So we had to build that into the budget. One other key factor, and I know we're moving towards getting that property closed the end of this month. In June, the board had taken action through a bidding process for the property sale on 3rd Avenue. And then on July 27th, the board took action on the purchase sale agreement. That agreement indicates that the property will sell, and that transaction will close by the end of this month. why that's so critical is when we were building the budget, it was unknown for us because Fund 40, our property special property fund, has debt service for L Street, which is the mortgage and principal and interest payment that comes due in September for about $1.5 million. It cannot sustain on its own, that particular fund, to make that payment. However, when this property sells at about $6.5 million, those proceeds are going to go into Fund 40, which will then provide sufficient funding to make, in essence, that payment. So we were able, during this 45-day, to reverse that entry, what we anticipated back during budget adoption. And again, these two variables here are unique because, again, 45-day is intended for the governor's budget changes, but because we had these other new factors into the process, we brought that into the analysis. Also, over the course of a few weeks into July and into August, we were meeting with our bargaining partners. So again, I mentioned a little bit earlier during another item where we had our teachers union have a 3-day permanent work reduction or work calendar reduction. That was incorporated into this analysis. We had our CSBA and MAGE bargaining units agree to 2-day furloughs for this particular year. So given the magnitude of those savings, we incorporated that into this budget revision as well. So a lot of moving pieces in a short period of time to, in essence, update our budget. So if we can go to the next slide, Carolina, slide 31. So here's, I just want to give you a snapshot again of how things will swing in terms of revenue amounts. So you can see what we included in the governor's budget back in, it's part of our budget adoption, was $355 million in terms of revenue. You can see that's a significant change. We were in the 1920 year with 396. That's what we had to base our budget at the time on. So with the governor's enacted budget, that number then was updated to $390 million, as you see on the right table. So again, from a revenue standpoint, we're able to recognize that, but now it's a matter of when do we receive that $390 million, as I was mentioning. And then Caroline, if you can go to the next slide, slide 32. And so here was a side-by-side comparison, and this is just the unrestricted budget. So it's not total general fund, it's unrestricted. So you can see from our various columns, so starting with column A, this number did not change from budget adoption. This is what we estimate. We're actually in the process right now of closing the books for 1920. So again, goes back to the work that we were talking with Pro. When we bring that forward to the board in mid-September, our unaudited actuals. So this ending projected balance of 1.2 might possibly change. But right now that's our estimate at the time. So we've held that static because, as you can see, it rolls into the beginning balance in column B. And so what we showed in column B was this was the work that had been done with all the decisions that the board had taken and where we were at updated prior to the governor's May revision. That's where we were looking at an ending fund balance of 7.2. Then when you look to column C, that was after May revised. This is what we had to adopt based on those latest variables and factors. So you can see how draconian, as I say, that bottom line impact that showed a negative $26 million. And then when you look to the last column, this is what now the impact is. So you can see what it impacted to the revenues, to the expenditures, and what it did to the bottom line. So it certainly did help in terms of our projections. It's showing about $13 million in terms of that bottom line. So that's this screenshot here, or this slide is showing basically the operating part of it, the revenues and the expenditures. If we go to the next slide, slide 33, this incorporates our required reserves, and it also reflects our multi-year. We're required to not only show current year, but 2 out years. So you can see that even in the current year, with that $13 million, again, projection, this is why then again, this budget becomes an ongoing update. We'll do our next update during first interim. And you can see that even with our set-asides of the required 2% economic uncertainty and the other items, we were still short about $3.4 million. So at this point, that's what's reflected for 2021. And then when you look at 21-22, and then the only caution here is that the governor's proposal includes, in essence, a hold harmless to the average daily attendance. So the number of what we had in 1920 is the number we will use as the basis for the next year. The only thing to caution 2021, because when you look at overall bottom line, you see a $636,000 difference. The thing to be cautious here is when the governor introduces the 21-22 budget, and depending on the economics of the state, will there be any reductions to the local control funding formula? So even though, so it's not, as you can see, the numbers held pretty static from year to year, but that's just temporary. And we don't know what will come forward in January that might impact that. And as you can see to the right, our cost of living adjustment number, like I mentioned earlier, assumes 0%. So if anything comes in favorable, will certainly help that revenue number. But one thing to know is in column C is then our basis of our enrollment numbers. We held to those enrollment numbers from budget adoption, but we are in that midst of that work now, with school being in session now for 2 weeks. We're monitoring that activity, that enrollment number daily, because that'll be key as we then bring forward to the board and then the first interim where we will make changes to those projections. And that's why you see in column C a much greater shortfall, because now you see the revenue impact catching up and the decline in enrollment catching up. So we will be reevaluating those numbers at that point. Okay. Then if we go to slide 34, this will highlight the cash piece of it. So we've shown you the kind of the statement activities, the income statement, but with that now becomes the timing and when we get the monies. So what we've shown here on the left, you can see just even in the month of June, that was one thing that was enacted immediately. The June payment that we were entitled to at the state from the state was not paid until July 15th. So in June, we did rely on those other funding sources. We had to go to Fund 25, Fund 35 to meet those obligations. And so but as soon as that payment came in on July 15th, we immediately paid that 4.3 and then $11.7 million. So that was paid off immediately. But what you see on the bottom goes back to those months of March to June. We anticipate, based on our cash flows, that during that time, you can see the magnitude, about $92 million we're going to need to borrow. For now, we've noted Fund 49. Again, we've had conversations with the county office about that. And we're looking to see if there's other options we can explore, because what you see to the right is what we already have in place. And this would be what I say the normal working capital needs with the county treasurer, in which they've advanced the property taxes. So they already had provided $30 million in July. We should have, I think, received already the $30 million for August. And then they will start to take that repayment through any supplemental taxes that come in. And then obviously the property taxes that come in December and in April to pay that. So that's that aspect of it. So that's already been accounted for. But the remaining $92 million that we anticipate at this point certainly can change. Just depends on timing and some of our projections and what comes in or doesn't come in from the state. We'll need to then temporarily borrow, but then have to pay back immediately. And what was noted there are the education codes. That was one of the areas that FCMAT had noted in their report, and that need to pay back within those timeframes. And then I think the last slide to kind of cover, I think it's slide 36, Caroline, if you can go to that. There was a lot of conversation a few months ago regarding an August budget revision because of the income tax revenues coming in the month of July. At this point, we haven't heard if that's going to happen, but certainly if there's any change, the legislature can call a special session to evaluate that. But if not, then our key checkpoint regarding this year's budget, and then also looking ahead for the next year's budget, will be in January when the governor releases his proposal. So I know it's a lot of detail, but it's a lot in where right now, this upcoming year, there's always that focus on the budget, but now more so will be the focus on the cash part of it. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Sakeld. As you can see, there's a lot of information. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the presentation at our board meeting last week, but do you have any questions, gentlemen? Mr. Gutowski?
Yes, I did in relation to the parcel on 3rd and L, because we had done, with Propo, some discussions on that. You had mentioned that we had sold it for 6.5 million. And then I will potentially, based upon the answer, I may have a, potential additional question. But what I wanted to know is, did we have a net profit on that after debt servicing, or is there a net loss that we're having on that parcel?
So in regards to that parcel, I mean, there's some real estate proceeds or transaction costs that will be incurred. I think it's very minimal. But what of those proceeds, let's say it's around $6.5 million, our debt service, we have an obligation here for, I want to say it's like the next 20 years. It will help offset for the next 3 years, because our annual debt service payment is about $2 million. So that $6 million will sit in that particular fund 40, and will help offset the debt service over the course of the next 3 years.
But can you clarify, Dr. Sakeld, it's not just, that isn't solely debt on the 3rd Avenue property, correct?
The L
What you're talking about,
the
L Street.
L Street only. No,
Dr. Aguirre, would you like to make a comment before we go back to Mr. Gutowski for further questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's 2 properties in question. The one is in 3rd Avenue, and we outright own that through an exchange that occurred back in the 1990s. So that's the property that's being sold. Those proceeds will then help offset the debt payment over for the L Street property, which still has payments coming due for a significant period of time. And so because of that, it means that the general fund won't be impacted, because those proceeds will be in Fund 40, which are an allowable method of expending those funds is to repay that capital that we own on L Street.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification on that. And I know when the investment was made in those parcels, I know we had paid a hefty sum for that. What my question to the board and to the district is there board policies that are going to require us to look a little bit more long-term about capital investments that we are making, so we basically don't run into these situations again? And I know from understanding a little bit more about the parcels, some of the parcels are pretty much for school district use may have not been optimal, as in terms of space. And what I want to make sure is the investments that we do make, we really take a critical look at that, make sure that the board policy supports that. So just comments based upon that.
Dr. Aguirre?
So you probably are very familiar with my thought process, Mr. Gutowski, and one of the things we're looking at is actually doing a master plan for L Street. That would allow us to maximize that space. In terms of the L Street property, there's multiple district campuses, if you will. There's 5th Avenue, there's Moss North, there's Moss South, and there's L Street. So one of the things we're looking to do over time is to consolidate to bring efficiencies, because again, it's a significant number of campuses, and if we're in a period of declining enrollment, it might make sense for us to look at consolidations.
All right.
Okay, thank you. But I encourage the board to
Right.
basically consider that long range
Correct.
planning.
You're right. And I think, thank you for that recommendation. You're right. Do you have any more questions? No?
No, thank you.
All right, Mr. Torres?
Yes, I just have a quick question. And it's hard to foresee the future, but the question is this, is that I don't know how much the state configured in its budget assumptions, the revenues from Washington, D.C., whether or not some of those budget assumptions were predicated on passage of the HEROES Act or the four acts before that. But the question is about the deferrals. And I'm assuming is that you're going to have to borrow up to the full 85% from the 49 fund, as well as the advances on the property taxes from the county. So my question is this: do you potentially foresee a possibility in this school year where the school district at any given month, be it January, December, whenever, that it would not be able to meet its payroll or all of its expenditure needs in any given month? Do you see the possibility that there may be a shortfall and thus the requirement of the school district to ask for an emergency loan or something?
Well, based on those cash analysis right now, again, we're exhausting all internal resources. That's the guidance we've been given. And so, based on that, we will go that route. I think what Sweetwater is experiencing, every other district is experiencing it. This is something that kind of goes back to what Mr. Smith mentioned, that going concern piece of it. This is an action that's been done by the state, right? I mean, and who would have expected the COVID and the impact to it? So it is something we're going to be monitoring very closely, that impact. If things improve by the state, that will certainly help us too. They give us more monies, and if some of these assumptions that we have to say, let's say it's 100% could be completely deferred, it might be less than that, maybe 50%. So we're assuming right now that worst case scenario, but we will exhaust all those resources internally for now. So I don't see that, but again, there's a lot of unknowns. What we see in the governor's budget I've experienced in prior years in the Great Recession, mid-year cuts. That's such an unknown right now, but we're monitoring it very closely, is what I can say.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look into that crystal ball, but I just wanted to ask the question. But if I may just kind of digress just a little bit, is I'm also on the planning commission for the city of Chula Vista. So I wanted to alert you guys is that on Moss Street, there's going, the industrial usage of that 616 Moss, I think, right behind the district properties on L Street. They're going to be demolishing that boatyard and everything else and putting some buildings there, some high residential uses there. So you guys might want to be on top of that, in that when they start construction, this is something I raised in the planning commission about putting a construction fence around that property high enough so that way all of the surrounding properties don't get inundated with dust and asbestos and contaminated soils and whatnot. So I want to put that on your radar that you may want to follow up on that with the city. So I don't mean to digress, but I thought it was important to raise.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. I'll make sure I'll share that with Ms. Jeanette Quirk, our Director of Planning and Construction.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. That's it. Mr. Solis, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Sakeld, I want to thank you and your staff for I know it's been a lot of work. I know from day one, you hit the ground running. So especially this year when you have a year end of budget planning, 2 audits, 2 external audits, and you're answering to the FICMAT and meeting with the county, it's a lot. And you're doing an excellent job at keeping us abreast of it and also working with your staff to make sure we're moving in the right direction. So we're very much aware of it, and thank you. So this is, our next item is about our committee meeting schedule. So would you like to address that, Dr. Sawkeld?
Yes, Trustee Halls, I think as Carolina pulls up that item, what we've added is the meeting in September, given the conversations with the Crow team. And then I know we have provided an update recently. Give Carolina a second.
Right.
That way for planning for, I think it's Carolina, it's showing your emails.
It's on the agenda item, I think.
Yeah. So I think it's just, yeah, it just provides an update, mapping things out from here through the end of the fiscal year. So with the meeting in September, and then we would regroup again in late, I'm gonna say it's November. Yeah, so there it is. So we have our August. So again, this is very unique. We've us having these back-to-back meetings, keeping the committee apprised of the 2018-19 audit. And then we would come at the end of November with an update to the committee on the 1920. So again, that's what, as Mr. Smith was mentioning, getting us back on track to a traditional cycle with the audit. We would bring that forward in November and then have a meeting in March.
Is there, I just want to clarify too, before December, will you be bringing the first interim to the committee as well?
I think in terms of timing, I think that's always been a challenge with having the first interim and given some of the board deadlines and the committee deadlines. So not sure if we could provide an update in terms of where we're at, but I don't think a complete first interim, that would be a challenge. I think November 30th.
Okay, Mr. Torres. Mr. Torres, do you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Oh, no, I was focusing on my phone, but I just noticed something is that I think the September 21st meeting came a little bit later, so I don't see that WebEx invite, unlike the other meetings.
I think we're asking about it right now.
Oh,
before
okay.
that invite gets sent out, we want to confirm that the team is understanding that they're actually bringing this back to a new date for us to meet. Since we didn't have the full audit at this meeting,
right,
we're adding this September 21st meeting. And once you and Mr. Gutowski and Mr. Solis confirm your availability, you'll probably get that invite out.
Yeah, I know I did.
And Carolina sent an email, I think last week, providing a preview of that would be possibly the date that we would be scheduling the meeting.
Right. Okay. And Mr. Gutowski, you as well?
Yes, I received it. The only comment that I end up having as in terms of the scope of work is if you could look at doing some dialogue on the audit scope before the engagement letters were issued. And if that can go into the potential planning calendar or not.
That is what we just discussed, was the engagement letters for the 1920 audit. And the committee agreed to recommend that the board accept those letters of engagement. So we won't be bringing back another engagement letter or discussion on the 1920 audit.
Correct. So in this next review, if we have a chance as a committee to discuss the scope before we issue the engagement letter, and I apologize if we did. I looked back through the agendas and I did not see that we ended up having that agendized in the last 2 or 3 meetings. So
you're saying for 21 then, right? For the next round. Okay.
Yeah, looking.
I think we were talking about doing that. Like that was something on our calendar originally, was to have a discussion about that. I think it would be around January or something, because we wouldn't have had engaged the auditor with a letter. Like just now is when we're doing that letter for 1920. If we start that discussion in January or March, if that's our next meeting, that would be in time for us to have that,
Right.
To weigh in.
They would start their field work for the 2021 year around April, May timeframe.
Right.
On a traditional track, if we end up saying that, yes, correct.
Right. So when we're talking about the 2021 audit, is March in time to have a discussion about the scope of that would be included in that engagement letter?
It should provide enough. They'll have their framework and yes, any dialogue with the committee, and then we can plan accordingly their field work from that point forward.
Thank you. But you can always bring your suggestions to the next meeting, and the one in November. We can, as we have other items, committee member comments, you can also bring comments in that regard. Is there anything else about the calendar you have questions around? All right. So the next thing is, would you like to take turns and make any comments, any further comments for this meeting tonight? No?
No, thank you.
All right. So if everybody's good, I'll adjourn the meeting, and I thank you all for your time and your consistent, good